A real leader has no need to lead, they are content in just pointing out the way. But a crew with no respect and a captain that doesn't demand it will fall apart quickly. Today, I want to talk about one of the most important conversations going around the community, which is, will there be more Nakama on the crew? We recently passed over some extremely sought after crewmate candidates once we left Wano, Carrot and Yamato being the primary candidates, but those ships have definitely set sail already. I'm sure there was many who thought Momo or even Caribou would join, and I thought Drake might find himself on the ship since he was completely uprooted within the Beast Pirates and has relatively no connections to get off of Wano from our understanding, which in chapter 1061 comes back to an interesting plot point. Now with Bonnie on the ship, which was something I predicted in the past, I don't think her role will be that of a crewmate and will be more similar to Law's role in being a guide in the start of the last saga. And so while I can't tell you how many crewmates Luffy will have by the end of the series, or if he will even get another crewmate in the first place, I do want to give the community another possible option for Luffy's last possible crewmate, and it's something Oda might have actually been telling us for a really long time. And so if you're new to my channel, the way I view the world is by making connections. So let me connect you to my vision, the Parvision. And before we kick off the new year, I want to shout out the sponsor of this video and pay careful attention because one of the rewards actually hints towards who the new crewmate might be. Talking about new things, there's a fresh Raid Shadow Legends update, a new season of the Forge Pass for all your artificers, the Plarium Points program where you can earn in-game goodies including a legendary champion. Also from January 16th to February 10th, Raid Shadow Legends is running a Champions Elect event where new players can vote on their favorite starter champion. But if you participate, you will have the opportunity to win awesome in-game and real-life prizes, including epic and legendary champions, in-game items, and even Amazon gift cards worth up to $1,000. Prize winners will be selected via a draw, and one champion will be crowned the winner. If you are an existing Raid player, you can still get involved by going to this link, where you can find a special promo code that everyone can use for a small in-game gift. Raid Shadow Legends is available on mobile and PC, so make sure to download it using my code. And in preparation for Raid's 4th anniversary later this year, this month will launch an Anniversary Titan event where you can earn anniversary points by competing in special themed events. Along with the new year, in this new month, there's a whole batch of cool new champions on their way. If you haven't already, get the MMA and pro wrestling megastar Ronda Rousey just by logging into Raid for 7 days before February 20th, and use promo code RAIDRONDA to get a bunch of useful items for leveling up sent to your inbox directly. But Raid also has nearly 700 other champions, and they recently added a new super interesting faction called the Sylvan Watchers. From forest elves, scary tree spirits, and living rock monsters, the Sylvan Watchers have it all. Instead of inhabiting a city, they made their home in Mistwood, a huge jungle in the east of Teleria. And if you visit this new faction, don't expect a walk in the park. Between the beasts and the Sylvan, trespassing on their land will pose a challenge, but they do have a city open to outsiders called Neressa, where the neighboring factions of Shadowkin and Dwarfs create the Neressan Union Alliance. There's so many characters in this new faction, some with plants and mushrooms growing off of them. And if you are new to Raid, use my link or scan the QR code here and get a free starter pack that includes a dope red-haired Norse-inspired Viking named Jotun, who can join your crew, and you'll get even more rewards like silver, gems, and epic skill tomes. And thank you for supporting the vision. By the end of this video, let me know if you caught the connection I had. So let me get this out of the way for the Vivi fans. If Vivi is actually the last crewmate, I feel like it would be in the same light as Momo, especially now. Sure, Koza could take over Arabasta, but realistically, after Cobra's assumed death, Vivi is the natural best leader for the nation. Her entire character was set up to be this way. I know she also wanted to be a pirate and all, but who says she can't be a queen and become a pirate on her own? And by that, I mean just travel the seas. This is just my 2 cents, but anytime someone says they want to be a pirate, it doesn't necessarily have to be with Luffy. But anyways, as you can tell, I have never really had a strong desire to add crewmates or for specific characters to join. When Yamato, for example, caught Luffy and smiled at him after the raid, I thought this was a great moment for someone who could become a crewmate. But obviously, as we now know, Yamato is more of a Wano-centric character, which I do have some comments about since that Oni lineage discussion I had in my Big Mom amnesia theory might give Yamato a lot more innate purpose to return in the story in a more meaningful way. With that in mind, Chapter 1058 sparked my interest because of the context it gives us in something that may be important for the impending Straw Hat and Blackbeard pirate clash. We all know Oda loves to make mirrors and parallels and create somewhat of an unbalanced balance, if that makes any sense to you. So the thing that sparked with me was that it said that Luffy had 9 senior officers, and given that at some point in the future we are on a collision course with the Blackbeard pirates and his 10 Titanic captains, it does make sense for Oda to equalize the numbers here. Now, we could get a really cool situation where like Sanji or Zoro take on 2 opponents on their own. And all you Zoro stands simmer down, you don't have to get mad that I offered the possibility that Sanji could fight 2 people and Zoro fights 1. I think that could make sense if Shiryu ends up being really strong. And he doesn't really seem like someone who would want to share a battle. But then again, it's not very anime shonen-like to have final fights that aren't 1v1s. But JJK kind of changes that a little bit. But honestly, who knows how the end of series fights will look like? So maybe the Straw Hats gain a crewmate or a really strong ally like Drake, who ends up taking on one of the Titanic captains. It wouldn't make sense to have someone like Law or Kid who have now been put on the same tier of respect as Luffy, but Drake isn't there yet and could be the person. But then again, I wouldn't consider that to be an actual crewmate to make the 11v11 equal number fight happen. So what if there is an option? Someone we've known for a really long time and someone who has been tracking the crew and is a part of this generation rather than the older generation technically. And by now you might have sniffed at where I was going with this, or you might have seen me bring it up in the Discord. The person I am proposing as a possible option for the last crewmate, as weird as it sounds, could be the one, the only Shanks. Yes, the red-haired Shanks, the captain of the red-haired pirates, the current Yonko, that is currently still operating and has the highest bounty of the remaining Yonko. That Shanks could actually become Luffy's crewmate, and it's something Oda might have been telling us for a really long time, and I know it sounds crazy, but just hear me out. See, the reason I considered this was someone in my comments section brought to my attention chapter 954. In the first chapter of the volumes, Oda gives us the title of the chapters within the volume, but also significant characters within the volume like within Wano, Kaido, the Red Scabbards, Yamato, and Momo, and other similar characters were all put there, but interestingly enough, when we look at the Straw Hat crew, we see a very odd thing. Oda's formatted the Straw Hat page to put these Shanks on the same page that lists the Straw Hat's crew. Oda could have easily organized this differently so that it could be more full, but instead made it look similar to how he showed Blackbeard's mystery 10 Titanic captains in the Road to Laugh-Tale. So this was interesting, and naturally I was like, well, maybe it's just there wasn't space. But then I look at the next page and it feels like there's more than enough ways to put Shanks somewhere else. But you're probably like, Parvision, it's not that big of a deal. It's just one page. I even asked the Hidden Island and he was like, it's probably just for spacing, which I want to point out is very sound and a reasonable take. And it's one that I agree very much with, except I decided to go back and see how many times this happens. And it turns out ever since volume 75 in Dressrosa, Oda has put Shanks under the Straw Hats regardless of spacing on other pages. Sometimes it's even confusing because it just feels like he has been blatantly associating Shanks with the crew through subtle messaging via the volume information sections. And let me just show how many times real quick. Again, most of these times, there was enough space or ways to have Shanks get his own section, and Oda does use this section to add details meaningful to the plot. For example, in Whole Cake Island, when the permanence of Sanji's presence on the crew was being challenged, Oda had Sanji on the Germa section in a fading manner, and had him under the Straw Hats as well. When Jinbei joined the crew, the very next volume, volume 98, instantly added Jinbei to the Straw Hat crew list. When we look back at Fishman Island volumes, Shanks and Jinbei were actually listed together in the information sheet. And look at how Oda used the Straw Hat crew page. he listed the relative allies to Straw Hats underneath them. Now obviously these people didn't join the crew, but to be fair, Caribou's inclusion here is kind of funny given the recent chapter developments, but we still don't know the context there. But I feel like Shanks' inclusion is really interesting because, like I said, after volume 75, Oda has put Shanks there regardless of circumstances. Like, even before and after Shanks meets with the Gorosei, Shanks is still on the Straw Hat page. And a very interesting thing of note was when I looked back into the pre-time skip, I thought a significant time to look back at was Arabasta, because that was when it felt like Oda had more of his story concretely mapped out. And though not fully relevant to today's discussion, back then, Oda had Shanks listed under Koza in a way that could lead you to think that Shanks was a part of the rebel forces somehow. It would be interesting if Shanks interacted with Koza as a kid following the Godfather Shanks theory. But that aside, now that you see that it's not just one page, it's several pages where Shanks is listed as a Straw Hat, maybe it's just because Shanks was the owner of the Straw Hat, or that he is the main inspiration for the captain. It could just mean that Oda has declared Shanks to be a forever ally of the Straw Hat Pirates, but it could mean he could eventually be a part of the crew, because I mean he is on the Straw Hats crew's page, which sounds crazy, not because it wouldn't or couldn't make sense, which I'll get into in a little bit, but from a power perspective alone. I feel like at the moment Shanks could be strong enough nearly to take the entire Straw Hat crew by himself, and people who are opposed to Yamato joining had a main reason that she was too powerful, and it would offset the power balance of the crew. And with Shanks, that's even more of a blatant issue. And so without getting too deep into my hockey theories, I feel like the best explanation as to why Shanks feels like he's going to be next level is mainly that he and a select few others like Mihawk will have powers that are ridiculous, but can be dealt with once others gain access to the same level of powers, which is supported by Film Red. And again, without harping on my videos, yes, I'm talking about my original elemental hockey theory and my end of series power-up theories like that from the Usopp video or Mind Rope video. And so now let's talk about Shanks narratively joining the crew. I mean, we do have an older character on the crew in Jinbei who is also his own captain, and I really like that trope even in real life. When you gain a really wise and experienced industry vet to join your startup, it's super powerful. And at the moment, we can sort of confidently say that Jinbei had a lot of obligations to not just his crew, but his kingdom and race, to the point where he couldn't even honorably join immediately. He had to make preparations to break off his associations with Big Mom before joining so that the Straw Hats did not become the targets of Big Mom's rage, which ironically did not matter in the end. That being said, it wouldn't be without precedent to have another character like that. If Shanks is a part of the underworld in some capacity, it's not like Luffy cares about that either. Both Frankie and Robin were part of the underworld and did some awful things, I'm sure. I mean, Frankie jumped Usopp and still joined. A lot of people say there's an assimilation that needs to happen for each crew member, and luckily everyone in the crew should know Shanks' relationship to Luffy by now. And it might even be like many of the other crewmates situation where they believe in Luffy in dismantling what's preventing them from reaching their own dreams. And we could even see a possible parallel to Whitebeard and Ace here. In many ways, Whitebeard became Ace's father figure and mentor. Ace and Whitebeard fought on several occasions, and what we learned of at Marineford was that while Ace wanted to sacrifice himself to get Whitebeard to be Pirate King, Whitebeard was more or less trying to prepare Ace to become the Pirate King. Is that not possibly the exact thing that Shanks is doing with Luffy? In that regard, Luffy would be Shanks' champion, which definitely feels like at this point. Another important detail is that Luffy's entire journey was to return Shanks' straw hat. It's Luffy's treasure, but he regards it as more important than himself at times. Not because it's his own, it's because he has to give it back to Shanks. But at this point in the story, that hat is so ingrained within the crew and its symbolism. It wouldn't make sense to ever give this back, does it? I mean, we have other nations wearing straw hats in recognition of Luffy. And on top of that, I think it's a growing sentiment that the straw hat itself is important for the Void Century, Laugh Tale, or even being the Pirate King in general. So if that hat is supposed to be the symbol of the Pirate King, then what's going to happen when Luffy and Shanks meet? Will they actually fight? Will Luffy beat Shanks before the end of the series? And if they do fight, why would they? Would they be able to take it seriously? I mean, they regard each other as friends, and while they could just fight seriously, it feels like any fight between them would feel lackluster in the sense that the stakes behind the fight wouldn't feel that high. Especially when it comes to taking down a Yonko, it feels like there has to be some kind of tension to make it interesting. And that's where my Reverie Davy Back video comes into play. I think what makes the most sense to me right now is that Luffy and Shanks will have a Davy Back fight for the Straw Hat. The winner becomes the captain, and the other crew will fall underneath the winner. If what I said about the Davy Back fights in that video is true, it might even be that the original prize of the Davy Back fights was the Straw Hat itself, especially if it dated back to the Void Century. The Straw Hat that Eam has in the Holy Land might have been the Straw Hat obtained as winning the last Davy Back fight. And maybe Shanks will show us the true nature of the Davy Back fights that Foxy probably fodderized. As we know in One Piece and in our world, traditions may continue, but much of the original context of those traditions are lost. Kind of like how growing up it felt like a Christmas tree was core to religion, but then you find out it was started by essentially capitalism. It may be that the Davy Back fight that the Foxy pirates showed us is not the same thing that was actually practiced, but also in many ways the vibe of the Shanks crew also fits the Davy Back fight style. So if we were to get more Davy Back fights in modern times, it feels like Shanks' crew would have to be involved in some way. I think the purpose of the Davy Back fights were more for peaceful conflict resolution between two parties, and that's something I go into way more detail in that previous video. And the overall idea being that it feels like if there were to be a Davy Back fight, the stakes that are involved is probably the most important thing to determine. With that context, the previous Davy Back fight fell flat for so many reasons. First, I don't think many people really liked Foxy as an antagonist. On top of that, there was a lot of cheating. But pirates cheat, and while that makes sense, it felt like that was the only way to make it interesting against the Straw Hats. And if anyone has watched any kind of competitive sporting event, it's never really interesting where there is random excessive cheating. On top of that, the referee for the Davy Back fights was from the Foxy team, so it was completely against the Straw Hats, and while it raised the tension of the games, it wasn't interesting to see the Straw Hats overcome a fabricated obstacle that as a basis had no real pre-established foundation. Prior to this arc, we had not heard anything about these games, the rules, the idea of it, nothing really, but on top of that, in the manga, this came right after the Skypiea arc, which though I never experienced personally as a weekly manga reader, from the grapevines in the community, I could understand it was a slower part in the story. But while it ended excitingly with Enel and Poneglyph ancient weapon lore, we quickly shifted to the awkward randomness of Foxy, who again wasn't really a favorite villain in any regard. So if we go back to my Davy Back fight video, the point that I made was that towards the end of the ancient Olympic history, it was kind of sullied by the Romans, who are known to cheat absurdly, the main reference being Emperor Nero, who competed in a chariot race and allowed himself the advantage. Normally you were allowed 4 horses, but he had 10, and fell off his chariot and still declared himself the winner, and you can easily see how as a participant or a spectator, that is so uninteresting, but sort of mirrors the unfairness that Foxy exhibited. Nero was the emperor, so they had the authoritative power to enforce these rules, which was something that Foxy did not have. When you take a step back, besides the Straw Hats abiding by the rules of the games with their own honor at stake, while the Foxy pirates weren't, we easily could see that the Straw Hat pirates could have easily destroyed the Foxy pirates in an all-out battle, which made the situation even more annoying. So now if we rerun this idea and replace Foxy with Shanks, change the stakes, and play according to the theorized original state of the Davy Back fight games, where they would be more synonymous with the Greek Olympic games that were honorable, I think that could play well for the story. And we do know Shanks to be more of an honorable man from what we've canonically seen in the story, abiding by traditions, trying to mediate situations rather than escalating them, but also not being easily offended like a fickle Nero would be. Luffy or Foxy. And while without the life or death stakes being present, I think that if the Straw Hat itself was at stake, that would be something that could make the situation very tense. This hat again became the symbol of Luffy's faith, so losing that would be insane. But also, if we were to retain the rules of the Davy Back fight, then the other aspect, if all else holds true, where the antagonist here, Shanks, is eons better than Foxy, but also the relative honor that would be maintained in these games, then the result would be that the winner would be able to poach crew members and the losing side would have to retire their own pirate flag. This would be the way that Shanks would join the crew. The Straw Hats would take down the last original Yonko crew, mirror a Whitebeard Ace situation, though a different structure, and most importantly, decide who would be the rightful owner of the most important treasure, the Straw Hat. So attaching this idea that while I think this synthesis is unique, it's not completely unique in that many thought Shanks would be involved in a Davy Back fight. I think the subliminal messages that Oda has inserted in the volume introduction pages also supports this idea. And so I want to add that while I was thinking in this direction, I thought it would be interesting if Buggy and Luffy were the two primary Yonkos trying to reach the goal, especially in that Buggy has been shown to mirror Luffy's rise throughout the entire story. For example, while Luffy was noted to gain allies naturally in Marineford, it was easily understood that Buggy had the same aura to him, and if not to an absurdly irrational degree. And now that Buggy has the Cross Guild where Mihawk and Crocodile are underneath him, even if it's a facade, it would be an interesting mirror if Luffy gained Shanks to match Mihawk. But then also to stretch this idea even more, if Doflamingo were to come back in the story, and if you were underneath Luffy to match Crocodile, that would be even cooler. I just wanted to add that idea in because it sounded fun, but it's not really necessary for the Shanks situation to come to fruition, and you might be wondering why I added that. I think especially with the chapters from 1058 to 1061, I think we do need to stretch our imaginations a lot. Maybe some people thought Mihawk could have survived the situation by being under some Buggy alliance, but I doubt many thought Crocodile was there as well. And if you were the progenitor of those theories prior to its reveal, I bet you were met with a lot of resistance, while the reality came to support your idea despite the doubters. And so I'm not afraid to put my crazy ideas out there because hockey comes from believing, not doubting. But anyways, I wonder if there is a world where Shanks ends up joining the crew or assimilates his crew into the Grand Fleet, for example. We do know that there is a plotline that brings the two worlds together from Bartolomeo. I really do wonder when the next time Shanks will be shown in the story and how the Godfather Shanks theory could tie in here. That being said, I will have a part 2 to that theory that adds some more fun details to a rather scary theory, and if you haven't seen it yet, I think it will open some synapses and turn your stomach upside down. And if you enjoyed this video, drop a like, share it with your friends, and consider subscribing and joining the community as a visionary pirate through Patreon, YouTube memberships, or Twitch subs. And so, like always, thank you for connecting with me, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you all on the next Parvision.